Today's episode of the Occasional Podcast is brought to you by Well Pleased AV. Importer Mark Sosa has hand-selected a remarkable collection of high-performance, high-value brands like Aqua, Inuos, Linenberg, QLN, Qualiton, Rhythm, Gigawatt, and more. Each of Mark's boutique manufacturers are driven by engineering products that communicate the lifeblood of music. Check out everything Well Pleased AV has to offer by visiting wellpleasedav.com. That's www.wellpleasedav.com. Welcome to the occasion. No! Yeah.
Woo.
One of my favorite co-hosts, Myra. How are you, sweetheart?
I am doing great, Mr. Hunter. How are you?
I'm fine and dandy. Fine and dandy.
Fandy?
Pretty. I was just thinking those two go really well together. Fine and dandy.
Yeah.
I heard you just came back from a show, and I was hoping you could enlighten us as to how it went down.
Yeah. 2018 was a big year for me, filled with yachty wonderfulness. So last time we talked, I think I had just seen Yacht Rock Review, the amazing yacht rock cover band. We talked about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. I saw them twice in 2018. So there you go. But the highlight of the year was seeing the Holy Trinity of yacht rock, Christopher Cross, Michael McDonald, and Kenny Loggins at the Hollywood Bowl.
At the Bowl, too. And if you haven't been to the Bowl, man, oh, man.
Yeah.
Great venue. Go early, camp outside, do the little thing on the side, but always get table tickets. It's so fun. You get to camp out and have drinks, and the temperature's almost always right for some reason, and it's good sound in there. So you got to see the Holy Trinity of yacht rock, and you know what? There's something I didn't know about them is those guys actually used to play together, in each other's songs.
Oh, for sure. They were all buddies back in the day. They guest starred on each other's tracks and wrote songs for each other. And many of you probably know, but What a Fool Believes, which I think is one of the Doobie Brothers' biggest hits, was co-written by Kenny Loggins and Michael McDonald, and they both released the song at the same time. Kenny Loggins released his version of What a Fool Believes, and the Doobie Brothers released their version of What a Fool Believes. And the Doobie Brothers version, I think, is the one that cemented itself in the canon of yacht rock. But I just thought it was pretty cool that they started jamming, Kenny and Michael and Kenny, and wrote this song, and they both loved it so much that they both released it. But yeah, I think same with Christopher Cross and Michael McDonald. They all kind of helped each other out, which is pretty cool. So it was neat to have all three of them on stage. And they kind of, I don't know to what extent these guys have embraced yacht rock and the moniker of yacht rock over the years. I think it's a fairly recent moniker. We all know the music is timeless and amazing and spiritual, but I think the classification of yacht rock is fairly recent, within the last couple years. And they fully embraced it on stage. I think when Kenny came out on stage, he said something to the effect of, I'm your captain of the yacht tonight, everybody. And that got the crowd going. So,
And of course, Christopher Cross, his big hit was actually
Sailing.
Yeah, he had Sailing. How did they look up on stage? How did everybody kind of hold up over the years?
Top marks to Kenny Loggins, who is literally 70 freaking years old and looks fantastic. Looks stylish. And is trim. He's kept up a good physique, I suppose.
Jeez. Sounds like you got a thing for him.
Yeah, those guys.
Those
guys named Kenny.
70-year-old Kennys.
Yeah. There's so many of them. But Michael McDonald, I think, has maintained his dadness.
I was going to say,
he was always a dad. And
he looks like
still
somebody's
looks
dad.
Like your next door neighbor's dad. Christopher Cross, I thought he looked good. There was a guy sitting in front of me who claimed that Christopher Cross was puffy. And he was a little outraged at that.
How dare he? How dare he let Father Time get to him like that?
I don't know. I was like, I think he looks fine for however old he is. But yeah, the guy in front of me kind of turned around and was like, has Christopher Cross always looked that puffy? But it was a fantastic show. Like you said, the Bowl is a top-notch venue. If you're in LA or traveling through LA, come see a show at the Bowl. You won't regret it. But this particular show was really fantastic. And I can only hope that they do another set at some time in the future. I'll be there.
And the Beatles played there.
The Beatles played there.
One of
Historical site. Yeah.
And so you do have a hankering, a knowledge, in-depth knowledge of yacht rock. Can you just kind of like run us through what the definition of yacht rock really kind of is?
Yacht rock, I believe, primarily took place from the mid 1970s to the mid 1980s. Okay, so that's the time frame during which this music took place. Primarily West Coast based. So during this same time frame, Billy Joel was cranking out the hits in New York, but yacht rock has a decidedly West Coast feel and flavor for whatever reason. I think a lot of the producers, a lot of the artists just were on the West Coast. There is a particular jazziness to yacht rock. A jazziness that I think underlies a lot of the music. You really hear it in the Doobie Brothers and a lot of Kenny Loggins' stuff.
But let's be clear, they have their own station on Sirius Radio. There's a yacht rock station.
They do.
They have 2 cover bands that make the rounds across the U.S. or
at least two,
if
not 50.
Your local band, if you have a scene, odds are there is a yacht rock thing. It's like
Yep.
what the 80s cover bands were, 10, 20 years ago. They're still there, but the yacht rock thing is another one of those things that has kind of blossomed out of a yearning for days long gone by, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Are there some bands that are actually not yacht rock that you might think are?
You mean yacht rock? I know there's a lot of people out there that like to kind of split hairs and say, well, this is yacht rock and this is marina rock. And what is marina rock, you may ask? Well, according to some folks, it is a cousin of yacht rock, but not quite yacht rock. Marina rock songs are Summer Breeze by Seals and Crofts or the Pina Colada song by Rupert Holmes. So I've told you what I believe are the general parameters of what yacht rock is and how yacht rock is defined as I know it. But there are some people out there who like to assess songs from the same time period, but claim that, oh, this isn't actually yacht rock. It's close. It has elements of yacht rock, but it may not actually be yacht rock. It may not fit that definition that I gave you earlier. So, for example, Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty. Love me some Baker Street. Love me some Baker Street. And fun fact, Jerry Rafferty is Scottish. So, I mean, right there you could be like, that's not West Coast, but let's put that aside. Same time period as all these other yacht rock songs were coming out, but I think Baker Street is losing some element of the kind of bouncy jazz that I think you might find in a Doobie Brothers song. Another example of a song that's not quite yacht rock or yacht rock, as we say, is Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett. Again, came out in the same time period. You might even say, oh, I could totally listen to this on a boat wearing my boat shoes, sipping some champagne in the sunshine. But again, it's missing a little bit of that jazziness, that bounce to it.
That is actually a separate station on XM as well. I believe he has a Margaritaville station.
That is true too.
Yeah.
That is
Maybe
true.
It's just Sirius that defines everything for us.
Hey, there you go. And that's fine with me. I love the yacht rock station on Sirius XM. I've actually discovered a lot of songs that way. Before yacht rock was even a thing, I have to tell you that I started creating my own proto yacht rock playlists, as I call it. Through Pandora, actually. I think one day I typed in Chicago, the band, and all the songs that came up, I was like, I am digging this. Whatever this is amazing. And at the time, there was no term for it. There was no yacht rock. So I called it Men with Mustaches and Mullets. Because frankly, that was the defining factor, the commonality across all of these bands. There were typically 4 dudes in the band. They all had mustaches and they all had horrible mullets from the 1970s. And that later became yacht rock.
If you didn't get a chance to check out our CES coverage, we just wrapped that up in the previous episode, and that was fun in Vegas. Not a super intense show, but a kind of a fun little Vegas trip out to the big electronic show. Now, on the other side of that, there's the National Association of Musicians Merchants show immediately following that, before everybody heads down to Florida next week. And at NAMM, which is down in Anaheim, here on the West Coast, it was very headphone intense. Now, the pro stuff, every once in a while, we would get a nice new DAC out of them, or, some nice studio flat headphones. The studio monitors, the overlap is very, very thin. Focal has a totally different line for both. So the reason there's not a lot of speaker stuff that comes out is because the speaker lines are really separated in terms of consumer and professional use. They don't overlap as much as you would think, unfortunately. But quick notes out of NAMM. Ultimate Ears has a new custom molding thing. So if you're into custom molded in-ears, there's a way now that you can do this from the comfort of your own home with a new line they are calling CSX line. Shorter ear canal overall, and it ends after right around the first bend of ear, so it doesn't go super deep. So some people have problems with custom in-ears going really deep. This might be a better solution for you. So that's kind of interesting. I did get a chance to hear the new UE Live, which is their new flagship, and I have to say I was impressed. It was just just to listen on the show floor, $2,200 for that thing, but it was pretty good, also expensive, but pretty good. And for those interested in earplugs, I found this awesome little company called Loop. They make $30 earplugs. They have like this ring that goes around, and it's attempting to actually reduce the distortion through the earplug. So they fit in just like normal in-ears, but these particular ones, they have a specific length tube that sound travels down that is supposed to reduce distortion in your ears. So I tried them on. They did provide a nice reduction, and the voices were kind of clear, more clear. I'm going to do a little bit more digging on that, but I thought that was really interesting to kind of come out of there. Audazese has a new pair of headphones. They are in partnership with a Paris-based leather company. Shipping now, they're $200 more than the regular, so they're $2,000 a piece, but they are lined in alligator skin, blue, and gray they come in. So that was pretty cool. And so there was also a lot of other Bluetooth things. New Bluetooth cable from Shure, a new Bluetooth cable, a new Bluetooth around the ear wrap with the battery Bluetooth thing that came out of Fostex. It's called the TM2. That thing's like $300, available in second quarter. So if you didn't catch the highlights from CS, there's a lot of what they call true wireless, and they're still pushing true wireless, but mostly it was about cables and then drums and pedals and dressing up and asking for free stuff. That is unfortunately a part of this one, because musicians kind of go to this show and they ask for free stuff. Like, can I be sponsored by you? So you see a lot of people dressed up like they're in costumes, but it's a really good people watching and a really fun time. So that's my last month. Crazy January. Our interview coming up this week, Bill Dudleston of Legacy Audio, designer, head of the helm. He gives a really fun perspective on things, so I think you guys are going to enjoy it. And thank you so much to my co-host, Myra, for joining me. Yada on, lady. You want to send us out?
Yeah, spin it.
Everybody, thanks for joining us. A very esteemed guest today, Bill Dudleston from Legacy Audio. How are you today?
I'm very, very well. How are you?
I'm good. Just kind of adapting to the 90-degree heat in November here. A little bit unusual. But you're not from L.A. originally. Are you from Chicago originally? Or were you born and raised?
I'm from the land of Lincoln. I'm just a few hours south of Chicago.
Very cool.
But it's a really great place to be based out of. It's a good place to get away from because it's just flat cornfields all the time, but it's got a lot of advantages from distribution side and
Oh, really?
cost of living and so forth. So it's a great place to manufacture from.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that about the Midwest area, but I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, there are a lot of cornfields, especially in Iowa, as I've traveled across the country, but it's beautiful. I think there's a certain beauty allotted to flat, beautiful pastures, and so a lot of people think, oh, the mountains, they're beautiful. Yes, they are beautiful, but there's a lot of beauty to be had in the middle there, I think. I lived in Chicago for a little bit, and I have to tell you, a lot of the local guys are very big fans of yours. There's like a good kind of interesting amount of production that in design that comes out of that little area right there by Chicago and South and North, and electronics has always been based out of there, I believe, and they got more than a few guys on the portable side. What other advantages do you kind of see out of working out of there?
Well, first of all, when you're trying to distribute something, I talked about the location, but from a manufacturing standpoint, most of the great veneers are processed in Indiana, in the United States, regardless of their source of origin or whatever. They come from, might be Brazilian rosewood or something, but it's getting peeled, and the panels are laid up in Indiana. So it's really nice to have that access for us there. At the same time, in terms of trucking routes and whatever, as we're shipping all over, it's super to have easy access to the ports in Chicago, and at the same time we have the distribution on the highway system, so that when you're trucking something, you can get either on the rail as it goes across country on the west side, or just by the highway system in the rest of the country.
So
Do you want to just kind of take me through a little bit your history, because do you have a double E, as they say?
It's funny. I went to school. My wife is a physician, and so she went to school for half of her life, I think, still going. And so I ended up just basically, I became a chemical engineer. I was a chemist, a chemical engineer, and mathematician. And you can say all that stuff. It's basically just physics. Mm-hmm. And so I was very passionate about applications for physics. And loudspeaker design fell out very naturally from chemical engineering, because a lot of people don't realize what a chemie does is deal with fluid flow predominantly, and sometimes with chemical reactions. But it's always about adhesives. It's always about polymers. It's always about fluid flow, compression, and so forth. And when you look at the applications for acoustics is the simplest possible environment that a chemical engineer could be even involved in, because it's basically room temperature. Mm-hmm. It doesn't deviate 1,000 degrees, and there's no chemical reaction and whatever. But it did help a lot with understanding modeling, interference effects, and comb filtering. And I think the thing that set us apart early in the game, I'm 20 years into DSP right now, 20 years. A lot of people are just now warming up to it, and the high end is just now considering sticking their toe in the water a little bit, And we've been doing it for a good 20 years, because we knew how to employ the filters and take advantage of what that technology could offer.
Yeah, I was gonna get into that, but we can jump right into it too, because I know you guys, you've been doing the DSP thing. Your top models include these type of different products, DACs, and that integrate into the system. Now, Gail Sanders of Martin & Logan has a new product out that he's been working on. We talked to him previously as well about the DSP, and a lot of his emphasis on DSP was about time alignment. So if the tweeter fires and then the bass fires, everything arrives at you in a very cohesive manner. Is that in essence what you're going for as well with DSP, or is it more nuanced than that?
First of all, with the DSP is that you can control polar tilt. And what I mean by that is you can not only control the time alignment, but you can also control the points of highest intensity in the direction that the lobes are presented in. If you have a symmetrical array with, say, mid-range above the tweeter, it's by nature going to have a lobe that wants to fire forward. but the interference lobes up and down are kind of complex. And so with DSP, I'll give you an example. You take a very sophisticated system in the Wilson Audio flagship, and how each driver is adaptable by with 5 millionths of an inch or something like that. But if your head moves up or down, then that is, so it has to be aligned at a certain height for that to be valid. Now either way, now that's still a speaker that's very well aligned. But if in an ideal world you align all these things and get that coherent launch, however you've gone about it, so everything synchronizes. But before you even do that, you have to look at the driver's bandwidths, their natural roll-off rates off axis, so that when you move to the side, that the speaker's not doing some dramatic tilt and changing dramatically in pitch off to the side. An ideal loudspeaker would only cover the listening angle that you would be in, and I guarantee you, if you go in your room, you won't see it larger than 60 degrees. 60 degrees is plenty wide enough, but what you would like it to do is cover the 60 degrees and then turn itself down at all frequencies simultaneously, so you're not driving the back corner of the room, whatever, and that gives you much, much larger sweet spot when you do that. So that's what DSP is for us. It's steering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think, driver technology, it's not the same as it was 100 years ago. But it's also, not massively different from 10, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, we kept the basic idea, and obviously the materials have changed and the drivers in this. Do you feel that DSP is that next step in order to improve performance even more than what is possible at the loudspeaker level?
Yeah, and one thing I can say is you can't make a speaker faster than it is. You can't. You can do some things to take irregularities out of the response, but you can't literally make a speaker faster by applying DSP. So it's going to have a reaction time and startup time, and you can try to normalize out these leads, lags, issues, whatever. But the transparency of the speaker is literally, as has been called, as tracing speed. And the better you can trace the waveform that you're trying to reproduce, the more accurate it's going to be. And if you picture a car going around a hairpin turn, you have your limitations in the mechanical world. Yeah. And so that's really where we're trying to overcome. As a net result is, every time you make a mid-range faster, you're increasing bandwidth, whether you're trying to or not. That's what you're doing. So all of a sudden you have a cone that you used to, in the years past, we might have a cone that for a mid-range that might be useful over a range of 200 hertz to 5 kilohertz. Well, you find out today that we have technology where those drivers are actually going out past 10 kilohertz. And that's because the transient capability of the driver is so superior.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I feel like there's been a couple of companies out there, once they got all their ducks in a row, the one thing that they've expressed that we're trying to do is, we got all this stuff, it's all set up, now we just want to make a faster driver. That's their goal, or at least the way they were presenting it to the people. It's like, hey, we just want this to be lighter, faster, whatever technique you use to get there. But it's very interesting you brought it right back to that as well. Speed.
Right, that's right. And the same way as low frequencies and piston area go together. You can have a 1-inch driver, and it could be the world's greatest, fastest 1-inch driver, but unless it's going to have 40, 50 inches of linear displacement capability, you're not going to have a bass driver. And when you do that, it loses its sense of speed, if you will, relative to the frequency. I've always used the oversimplified analogy, but if you had to empty a swimming pool and you had a spoon in a bucket, who's going to win? And so the heavier bucket is going to beat that spoon every time. So it is related to the bandwidth or the frequency end of the spectrum that you're dealing with.
I did notice that in a lot of your models you choose a ribbon-style tweeter. Is there any particular reason for that? Do you find it superior? What reasons do you have for kind of choosing that particular direction?
Mostly because less stored energy. If you have a spring-type driver like you have when you're dealing with a typical suspension system, One thing I can just say without question is that you'll find that a driver's mid-range characteristics get better as the edges are more clamped or stiffer. You look at B&W's research over time, and you see them moving away from sloppy rubber edges or something. You'll notice that they're going to more and more of accordion edges or flat edges, flat foam. And that's kind of a well-known thing in pro audio. That was kind of late coming to consumer audio because we were trying to build these wide bandwidth two-ways all the time. And so if you're going to a multi-way transducer, which is always my preference, I like to have at least a three-way if possible. You can balance the trade-offs, if you will, and get some of the things done. But the driver technology really is it has moved forward quite a bit, but realistically, it's due to the fact that we divide the spectrum. And now we can use heavier voice coils because we have more cheaper amplifier power. Once, I have a speaker called the Caliber, and it's got a 700-watt amplifier built into it. And, and it's a compact bookshelf speaker. Do I really need 700 watts? Yep. When you try to get bass out of a small box, and you're going to have a stiff spring, there's a lot of restoring force there. And you have to overcome that force to get that driver moving. And it really, the amplification is as much a part of the improvement in loudspeaker design as any aspect we've come across.
Yeah, because I've seen, or I've heard, through doing these interviews, I've also seen that some people often praise the idea of having to be able to design an amplifier for only one speaker, like having them in the same box. You don't have to design the amplifier to try to be the sum greatness of all speakers that might be attached. If you have just one amp, make it exactly right for the one speaker. There's a lot of gains to be had. Do you find that to be true as well?
Yeah, coming back, when you think about amplification, and we were talking about ribbons, one of the reasons I like ribbons over say dome radiators and stuff like that is the constant impedance. It's impedance curve is a straight line, so it's a real cakewalk for an amplifier to drive it. And when you just have a straight line for impedance, there's when you apply even a passive crossover, it behaves exactly as it's supposed to. Yeah. If you try to take a dome device that has an 1800 hertz peak of maybe 20 ohms, and then you're trying to filter the bottom end off of that, and as it's going up and down that roller coaster ride, the impedance is all over the place, and then you have to design networks that reduce that impedance, and ultimately you're sucking more and more current. So it kind of comes down to where the amplifier and the transducer's diaphragm they're all part of that same system, just like a car engine is to the tires, So.
If you could kind of remove, let's say price, and you don't have to really sell this product. You can just design the most superior loudspeaker ever designed. Is there, aside from price, is there a barrier that you would remove in order to design something that's even better than what's been done?
Yeah, I would like to. If I could have a speaker that's 4 foot wide, you can do just amazing things.
Like the guy from Back to the Future. Remember that scene?
Yeah, and it really, in my case, I wouldn't use a large diaphragm, but I would use multiples of them. But I would my own proprietary arrangement for that is if you took a matrix of 9 drivers, and let's just say for the sake of simplicity, in this case, they're 12-inch drivers. So I have 3 feet across, 3 feet up and down, and all the outside corners are dipolar, and the cross pattern that's left in the middle is all sealed or ported. What's going to happen is you're going to develop a cardioid radiation pattern that has no low-frequency losses to the sides or rear, basically. When I say losses, I mean leakage. Leakages are actually lots of losses because it's canceling its output. But the energy moving forward is so much cleaner and purer. You don't have the back wall confusing the issue, and you don't have It's just it's a great directionality control. So the answer to that question, and simply, is it let me make it a little bit bigger, and I can make it a whole lot better.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how they in that movie they depicted just one large speaker, but in all of the cabs that people took car around, it's always like a set of four drivers. Not just one large thing.
Right.
That's like so ludicrous. That's why I think obviously it's a funny scene, but
Right.
in the application in real life, it's just like no one ever does that.
Yeah, you can get with mutual coupling. Anytime you can take two drivers and put them next to each other, you're getting a free ride. Where in the bandwidth that they share air on each other more or less. And there's a point where they finally interfere with each other, which is very pleasant effect when you want destructive interference off axis. So you'll see most of my baffles tend to be the wide width of about a pair of human shoulders. And I tend to design speakers that way because you're reproducing frequencies that are typically being generated by either a voice from a human torso or a person that's playing a cello or whatever. And so that baffle is always there. So if you have a speaker with a similar size baffle, it inherently loads those same frequencies.
Now, is the dual AMT bridge-mounted post-convergent tweeter array that you see in the new Valor, is that something that's brand new for your line, or have you used that before?
No, I haven't used that before. I really like what it does because the tweeters are angled, and so as you're moving, say I'm talking about the left speaker, as I move to the right, the left element is tracking me, and the right element is pretty much out of the picture. And so no matter where I'm at, left or right, it's panning across there. I spread them a bit on the Valor because I have an aperture there in the center where the coaxial titanium driver fires right through that.
Oh.
So that single 14-inch mid-range, if you will, actually in that little 14-inch circle, you have two 4-inch AMT drivers, and then you have a titanium coaxial driver that sits within a 3-inch voice coil, and then you have the 14 above and below. So.
And what's the crossover look like for those different? Are they closely? Is there overlap? Obviously, right?
Yeah, there
between
is
some of it.
There is, and there's special shaping going on. Some small things I don't. The energy that radiates to the outside is slightly attenuated. So the right, if I'm on the left speaker, the right hand tweeter has a slightly different frequency shape than the one that's on the far left that's coming across, because it has to reach farther to the other side of the room. Whereas the other one, you're trying to minimize wall interaction. But one thing I will tell you is when you get off axis of it, when you move off axis of the tweeter that's the cross-firing unit, it dies like a rock, and that's the beauty of it. There's just no junk being fired around the room before it gets to the listener.
That's very interesting, and it looks interesting. I was very curious. Thank you for going into that about the design of that specific piece, because it just kind of had a new thing, and it's very interesting how you kind of thought about that in terms of distribution when it fires out. So, you've been doing this for quite a while. Do you have any design influences that has guided you along the way, or heroes, or even a mentorship thing? That
I can tell you that I grew up on the pro side of things in terms of reading loudspeaker anthologies, and didn't come at it quite the same direction as, say, Jim Teal or some of the other guys, that were good guys. And, I've tried to use physics to my advantage and not my disadvantage. So I've tried to go back and look at, if a loudspeaker is perfectly analogous to a microphone, perfectly analogous, and it works exactly the same way, it's just driven the other direction. Yeah. So if you took a figure of 8 microphone, and that's the equivalent of a we call it a bipole, but it's really a dipole, and so in this case, when you reverse the polarity on it. But if you have 2 diaphragms separated by space, which is Harry Olson described, you can create a differential microphone in which you have better focus, and you can create an in-firing array with either using. You can, if you put 5 microphone elements, one in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other, the novice looks at that and goes, well, heck, only the front one's picking up anything. Everything else is just picking up from the sides. Well, it doesn't work that way at all. Actually, it's differential. The only thing all of them pick up together in unison is that which is moving in the direction of the axes the microphone lies on. So therefore, you get a sense of direction, and therefore you're able to reproduce vectors instead of just scalar amplitude.
So you kind of, done the loudspeaker thing, and now you're getting into DSP, or you've done so for quite some years. Is there another kind of direction you want to go now? Are you just continually exploring new ideas?
I can tell you what my hobby is recording, and I love it so much I don't want to make it my profession. But
wise advice.
I just know how it works, and I'll never have any time to do it if the business side of it will take over. But I can say that the broadening of the interest of the directions I'm going into, I'm very interested in new technologies such as graphene. There's a lot of hype out there about graphene being available and being used, and everything from wires to woofers. And the thing is, it's not really graphene yet. You're not using a single layers of graphene in a large, strong monolayer surface yet. Now, I'm sure the same people that are looking at it now are going to be one of the first ones to employ it, but it's just not ready yet. But I see microphone diaphragms and headphones benefiting tremendously from it, because you'll have the conductivity that you need. It's a superconductor, and the second thing is that it's stronger than steel or titanium or whatever multiples for its unit mass. So therefore, it's going to be extremely durable, and so the qualities are so idyllic that it's kind of like the holy grail of audio in terms of all the speed and strength and everything we're going to need is going to be there. So and conductivity. So, but that's that kind of direction. Being a chemical engineer, I'm constantly I spend hours a week, every single week, on graphene progress and who's doing what and how soon we're going to get there with carbon nanofibers and so forth. So,
yeah, it's very that's cool, because I haven't really heard too much about that when I asked that question, and I know that we've had kind of an interesting go, at least you brought up headphones, in the headphone space, because they've always had a couple of different we always have the regular dynamic, and then planar magnetic and electrostatic have all worked their way into that ethos. But I'm just wondering what's next, because you have a little bit of portability there. Things are smaller. There's no room, right? There's no room to mess with the sound. So I think that it kind of opens up a kind of crazy opportunity for higher definition and better sound. I personally don't think it's a natural of a sound, because it's just so close to your head and this kind of a thing. But but the idea that we could drive resolution to new levels just because there's so little in the way of it, I think is really fascinating. And any other kind of technology that we push that would be really fun.
Yeah, the other thing that we're deep into right now is, as you're aware with, I have binaural head, and I can tell you right now that is theoretically pure as the binaural head is, whether the microphones are set at the end of the ear canal or at the opening or just outside the ear, you don't get an image in front of you when you put on headphones afterwards. There's a lot more going on than head-related transfer function. People don't realize how little they think you can hear phase differences between your ears. No, you hear phase effects in acoustic cancellations that affect the amplitude, and then we hear it. But it's not, if I tweak the phase in your left channel relative to your right, it's not going to cancel in your head. It doesn't work that way. And even though we may call the effect some effect phasey, that's acoustic cancellation that's occurring out in the space outside your head. So, but there's so many things that you would love to do in audio we're not doing yet. For example, I think Bob Carver was the first one to mention this to me, but he said, and I named a speaker because of this, he said, we won't be done until you can feel a woman's warm breath in your left ear. And I knew what he meant by that, intimacy. How do I get intimacy, discrete intimacy like that? And so I built a speaker called Whisper that was an antenna driven backwards. It was a big speaker with lots of diaphragm surface area, and it allowed you to form an image that came a lot closer to doing what he had suggested. And there are some ways to actually do what he's talking about right now that I know how to accomplish, but they're not practical. Mm. But between the headphone dilemma, the rendering process where we make recordings, there's somewhere along the line that this will be discussed at Capitol, I'm sure, at this event I'm going to. But the rendering process is such an important factor in the event anyway, that the recording artist has the ability to sit with 90 plugins, and they can change things to sound any artistic way, and however they want it to sound is how that art should sound. But when it comes to reproducing sound accurately, that's a different thing. And the people that have the skills to record things, to make them sound true, natural, interesting, intimate, you are transported to the environment instead of vice versa. I don't want to have an orchestra in my room. I just want to feel like that I was transported out of my room to the orchestra, And so there's lots of things that can be done with DSP that we're working on right now, and we have some pretty radical demonstrations of that technology already and how workable it is. So.
Yeah, I hear just down the street from here at Harman, they have offices down there, and they've been working with these kind of crazy DSPs where apparently they have an array of loudspeakers set up in a room, and then they have headphones, and you like listen, and then you put them on and you take them off, and they're working towards, I don't know what their end goal is or what the product looks like, but they're just kind of the naturalism, right? We're getting into how do we fool our brains just a little bit more, a little bit closer.
Right.
And one of the other questions I kind of asked on this subject is, do you think that there is any type of idea that as a human species, just the way our ears are designed, we like a sense of distortion in our hearing? And like, why are we all so drawn to tube amplifiers? There's so many people drawn to tube amplifiers. Why do guitarists often distort their guitars in a very warm way? Is there any credence to the idea that that realism is somehow related to distortion? We're always trying to clean it all up, but we sometimes bring it back in. And why would we do that unless there's some?
Well, there's a term that most of the scientific types hate that I think is a great term, and that's musicality. Yeah. And because if it's not enjoyable, it's not pleasurable. If it's like eating food that tastes flat. If there is an essential musicality that makes something, I don't have any trouble with a recording that sounds better than natural. That's fine. That's cool. It's somebody's taken me on a journey a little farther, a little more intimate than I could even get if that person was sitting 8 feet from me.
Yeah.
So I get into that just fine. But the in terms of just the natural scope of things and the feeling, just the overall textures of everything, I think that's what's so much of the time is missing in recordings. And I think that here again, it comes back to the rendering of things, and there's an interpretation involved in it. So collecting the information that stimulates the senses in such a way that it feels believable, palpable, I think is what our goal is. And all this digital stuff, I think back about the Archimedes project at the close of in the 90s, Bang & Olufsen and I think Meridian and a number of good companies came together and funded this thing where they had a sphere that you can sit within. Now Genelec monitors are doing something very similar right now at an AES event, I believe. And those are really valid tests for localization and spatialization and determine how much resolution you need. But my firm belief is that we don't need a whole lot of resolution above our heads. We have kind of a blind spot up there, and if you're walking down the street and I'm climbing way up in a tree, and I yell, hey, Brian, you just don't look up. You're going to look left, you're going to look right, you're going to look everywhere, but you don't look up. And first of all, you don't expect anything there. And the second thing is the amplitude goes to both ears so similarly that you don't have any real cues. So I think having a whole bunch of speakers in the ceiling is not the correct direction to go. I know Alan Blumlein had talked about kind of a pyramid shape, if you will, where you had a center channel, some wide flanking lefts and rights, and one speaker directly overhead. And that would be a really nice sound field. And I think he was pretty right, since he was the guy that invented stereo in the first place. So
I did never thought about it that way. Just that when someone calls from above, you would never check. You would never. The localization to that, to up and down, isn't nearly as good as it is around left to right.
No, it isn't. In fact, you'll notice, if you rub your fingers, thumb and fourth finger together off to the side of your head, you'll notice that when it gets slightly behind your ear is where you really have a lot of acuity. And that's obviously because we're looking out for predators,
right.
And that's just how that works.
Yeah, I find it interesting that there's that element of it, and there's also it's been said, I think earlier in the season too, season 1 that we did this show, someone said that our ears are fine tuned to the weakest of our kind, meaning that a baby's cry there's so much emotion. I mean, if you hear a baby crying, it's like, whoa, this like really impactful single sound out there.
Yeah.
And then we've evolved this way, and so taking that back into audio though, how do you kind of look at speaker design and DSP around the human voice? Because I think that's what they're really getting at. We're fine-tuned to be able to hear people of our own kind and this type of thing. How do you work around that and into that?
Well, this morning I spent a few hours with James here, and who has a special sound room, James Thompson, and it's a very, very carefully designed sound room with resonance control and Helmholtz resonators and diffusers, floating walls and whatever, to try to eliminate the outside environment. And I don't know what the noise floor in there is, but it's got to be like minus a million, man. It's just so quiet. You can hear your heartbeat, but it's not like an anechoic chamber.
Right.
It's quite different. It's just really quiet. But there's nice diffusion in the room also. But when I'm listening in that room, you hear a range of things that you wouldn't otherwise hear. But and I think that your question. I'm going to get off your question too much here, but I think that when you can hear that mid-range is where we live. If you are outside and a truck drives by, you don't go, dig that bass, man. And it's the same way with the tinkling of chimes outside your window or something. You think, well, that's pretty, that's a lovely sound and nice and airy, but you don't sit there and analyze. But in the mid-range is where we live, and that's where we dimensionally know what kind of room we're in. It's where we know if you're using an AVRE 60 or not. It's just one of those things that you that's the center of the universe when it comes to sound. So I'm in his room, and our bass is great. It's so great you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
You don't think about its overhang or anything, because all we're hearing is in the mid-range. Well, that's what happens when the room gets out of the way. All of a sudden, the weighting of the frequency response becomes more natural, and you don't think about the highs and the lows so much.
There was two kind of things that popped into mind as you were talking about that. One is that there's a lot of accessibility right now in terms of measurements. They start to sell these little heads you can buy for like $250. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of these hobbyists that are starting to do more and more graphs. And one of the observations, though, I do believe there's a disconnect between what the ability to get a graph and the comprehension to actually interpret it seem to be going in two different directions. Because a gentleman once, and I want to ask you this specific question, said, oh, look at this dip right here. That's where detail is. Do you feel that we perceive detail in a very small amount of frequency openings across the scale, or it is resolution like a holistic kind of look?
You know, I'm going to attribute the evaluation of all those things to the brain. And I'm going to tell you, your hearing mechanism is a lot more coarse than people realize. I know that they realize it's a mechanical device, and they see the classic eardrum, as we call it, in tympanum, and we see the mechanical factors and the anvil and the stirrup and so forth that people were taught about ears when I was a kid. And but when it comes down to the cilia, that the hair follicles that are being blown back and forth, if you will, in a fluid, washed back and forth, it's like shafts of wheat in a field. Yeah. If you look at that field when the wind's blowing, you know the wind's blowing west to east, but you look in that field, you can't really tell for sure, because at different points in that field there's different pressures, and therefore it looks like the whole thing's just waving back and forth, and that's what's happening. Well, wave transmission is like that, and it's a very poorly understood phenomenon, but it has been found that we really only mechanically convey information up to the rate of 500 hertz. That all the rest of that information is the brain's ability to resolve little differences on those carrier frequencies, if you will, where it is able to interpolate and extrapolate those higher frequencies. Now, it kind of makes sense. If you made yourself a mechanical device, what do you think, as simple as an eardrum, what do you think the bandwidth of that thing's going to be? You know, and you've got these little contacts, and then you've got to wriggle the fibers, and then you got a chemical reaction that's got to generate an electrical characteristic stimulus that goes all the way to the brain. Then the brain's going to work on that. So all I can tell you is until we understand the hearing mechanism better, we won't really be able to take audio to another stage. And psychoacoustics is really where it's at. And I think that's the area that I got into by chance, partially by interest, but mostly, if you have time, I'll tell you a real brief story about that.
Please.
Yeah. There's a Dr. Bela Ulas is the father of psychoacoustics, and he had called my factory, and I didn't know who I was talking to. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize who I was talking to. And the office girl said, hey, this guy's got some questions about speakers, and he was asking really good questions. None of them were typical audiophile questions, but they were all questions about how does this behave, how does this speaker, it wasn't just using the word transient response. He was talking about how does it dissipate and so on and so forth. And how about the interference differences between the loudspeakers in a room? And so I likened it to, 3D glasses and the differences in head-related transfer function that you even have through your eyes, if you will, and the spread of your eyes and the fact that they can simulate things with the red and green filters or whatever. And so at some point in time, I actually quoted him to himself. And here he is, on the chair at Rutgers and this recognized guy. And then finally he goes, stop. He goes, I've been looking for you. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, I have been looking for a person with your enthusiasm about this topic to take where I've left it. He goes, I've taught all the students I'm going to teach. He goes, I want somebody who's going to. So he sent me this box that had all these articles and journals and things that he had written, and a little diary-like book, and even had a pair of 3D glasses from the 50s kind of thing in the box. And so it totally changed my perspective of how I should be looking at stereo. And so at that point in time, I came to realize that stereo is nothing, there's nothing fundamentally correct about stereo. It just is an effect that works in a satisfying way. Two microphones in space, and you get a phantom-centered channel derived from it. There's no correct instructions on how do you point the microphone, how far away, whatever. It's an imperfect thing, because if you move closer, you get proximity effect, and if you move away, it sounds thinner, more distant. And if you look at the other characteristics in terms of soundstage width and depth and so forth, you realize that that's a lot of burden on a two-dimensional channels. All you're doing at any instant in time is recording a single amplitude, which could be pressure, it could be voltage, where you are in a signal chain. It's still just intensity and time. And until you can break that down into a sense of where did that signal come from, and how is that interrelated in a 3D space, we're leaving out way too many cues. If I could change the world today, what would I do? I'd record everything with stereo pair. Every instrument that I was trying to near field mic, excuse me, I would mic it with stereo pair. It's just good information, and when you go to play it back, you'll automatically get a vector. It won't be a scalar.
Yeah, Bob Stewart said in one of his interviews that the ears are faster than the eye, not the light, and not obviously sound waves travel slower. But once it hits your sensors, that the ear can get it quicker because the eyeball has so many receptors to get the image and whatever. That it's actually faster.
Yeah, the number of cones. In fact, our resolution on our monitors today is exceeding the number of cones. Once they go to 8K, they will have, and we're already there at 4K. Even if you had the broadcast material, going to 8K isn't going to change anything because we're already past what the eye's receptors are capable of.
Really?
So you can move, what we're doing now when you go to 4K, you can sit really close.
I was going to say, there's distance definitely plays into that equation, right?
Yeah.
How close you are matters. But
so,
if it's a locked distance, that's what you can see the whole screen from. At some point, we're going to break it, and you're saying...
Yeah, we're already there, And so the resolution that we're achieving there now with hearing, it's so different because the way... there's all kinds of difficulties with the eye where, it first of all, it's got a dead spot in the middle of it. Its own...
Where the cornea attaches or whatever, the wire attaches.
Exactly. When you have, and then you have the plumbing, if you will, it takes to make it work. So the electrical harness and all that stuff, you might say, is in the way, blocking signal, and so there's lots of complexities in the eye that that are very similar in some ways of how we hear. But hearing is really amazing, and if there's no question, if I was given the choice, if I had to either lose my sight or lose my hearing, which one would I prefer to lose? Well, definitely my sight. No question, my sight, because with hearing you can interpret so many things, and obviously once you've had the gift of sight, you kind of know what things look like. It's not like you were born blind; you have to make things up. But it turns out that the people that have been born blind create a world that is every bit as sophisticated as what we see anyway. So, but in their imagination. So, I think if there's any clarity that I'd like to bring to the table for everybody is, I'm looking to buy myself a turntable right now. I've given away the turntables I've had in the past. I'm ready to buy myself a new turntable, and I've got some cartridges that are pretty good that I've accumulated over the years. And but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna say to myself that this turntable is the natural way to record sound. To elaborate on that very briefly, and so what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to put digital in the best light possible. When you're in an analog world, and I have to have a polished rock, if you will, bouncing off a canyon in a groove on a record that has a circumference of say it's a foot for the sake of simplicity. So it's pi times 12 inches going around on the first groove, but on the last groove it's pi times 5 inches. So there's something it's just not a very linear device. The resolution drops as you get closer to the center of the record. You get fewer samples, if you will. Even though the frequency range may not, your samples for that frequency have decreased. There is an inherent surface noise that you're going to generate. I think that's the most endearing part about stereo is that it does, an LP, is that noise actually creates a consistent curtain of space in the L-R component. And I remember Bob Carver had the digital time lens years ago just for that reason, because he recognized that also. So I think so much of what we have liked about LPs and tape is that incumbent noise, or that continuum that is in the difference component. And when you take and listen to pure sterile digital back, digital is, if the reason why digital is not fully there yet is that the algorithms we're using to play back stereo are not fully correct. And so, and that's the area we're working on. It has the potential, of course, just like an LP, at any instant it can record an amplitude. And it can record it flawlessly, you might say. But we have taught ourselves to like the sound of the comforting sound of that continuum of noise. And when you don't have that with digital, sometimes it causes an uneasiness to it. So, but with technology and understanding what's going on in the time domain, and then applying, just like there's apodizing filters that eliminates pre-ring, and so forth. By intelligent design and truly chasing the problem, we're going to come a lot closer and move forward faster in audio than spending all of our energies arguing what's better, digital or analog. Well, we came from analog. We're moved into digital, and we can take what we learned from both aspects and end up with something better.
Not along the lines of analog and digital, but a different spin on that idea would be like particular ideas and comments that have been said about pro audio to the audiophile ideals. Sometimes the argument is made that professional equipment sounds sterile, or it's analytical, the details of it, but it's too analytical and there's not enough musicality involved. Mm-hmm. Do you find any of that to be true in your experience working on both sides?
Oh, yeah. We just spent the morning listening to picking selections of Capitol records that were recorded on U67s and so forth from way back. And the simplicity of the recording style, it was a strong component. They didn't even really cross-mix the bass. They just kind of left it in the left channel on most cuts. It seems like the level was louder overall on the right until the bass line came in, and then it would equalize out all the time. But when you factor all those little things together, I don't know. I think there's so many elements, so many pieces that have to come together before we have a viable picture. But one thing for sure, we overcomplicate it with too many. Here again, Don, on the other hand, if I like realism and you like pop art, if you like Picasso and I like Renoir or something like that, they're two different worlds. What you like and what's real are two different things. So I try to keep it. My job is to be the purist, the true purist, and that is follow that which is most accurate. And then let the artist do whatever they want to do with it.
That's a sound thing. I think when I think about consuming audio and other things too, other forms of art, it's exactly escapism, but I want something that's better than real life. Like if I wanted real life, I would just go to real things and listen to birds chirp or whatever. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, not all the time, I want to sit down and be entertained, and I get more entertained when things are better than real life. They're more fantastic. I think there is sometimes, not always, a tinge of that on the audiophile side of things. If you go from room to room at these audio shows, every once in a while you go where it's like, that wasn't exactly as analytical as I've heard from like a full pro gear, end to end, like the monitoring system. Sometimes it can be a little sterile. If it's good across the board, it's good. Like I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying there's a sprinkle of flavor here and there that can make it better, but it's not for everybody. And there's obviously a responsibility. If you're in that chain, you don't want to add your own flavor in, I would think, too heavily along the way, or it's not going to jive with something further down the thing. But if you can control the whole thing, maybe it's a little bit different.
Right. Yeah. When I'm making recordings, I'm a different guy.
Yeah.
Because seriously, I'm looking at it and think, well, I'm going to have analytical playback equipment, so I'm going to have to make sure that I get the sound I want. I tend to use tube preamp microphones. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't take the Sony digital. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't go digital all the way, because I can get that same character by emulating it in a lot of ways. But the reality of it is, the reason why that when we can use that term musicality, which I do like that term, is that I know that valves have a slower release sensation. If you put your finger, let your finger stick it on an iron, you hear tss.
Yeah.
And that's a treble sounds a lot more like tss than tss, tss. Right. And there's something natural about that. And that's just it's your brain telling you, hey, there's something right about that.
When you said that, I was totally thinking about how people choose to do like these really heavy clips for treble in sampled songs, right? So in sampled songs, it's like this, and every time they clip it on both ends, and it's very unnatural, it shocks your brain a little bit, like it's really punching through your brain, because it's like, it's so unnatural, the fact that it just starts and stops with no natural decay whatsoever. And it's for effect, and I totally get that, but I like that you bring that up, because I was just listening to a song the other day where I'm like, whoa, every time I heard the song like that, it's so unnatural, but I get it, because it's so, it's rhythmic, very rhythmic in that sense.
That's right. You know, I use test signals, impulses, in a little different way sometimes. But if you take and measure a speaker's impulse response, and even an anechoic chamber, you know, you see the decay of the vibrating system. If you clap your hands, for heaven's sakes, and you look at that waveform, you'll see your skin, the flabbiness of your palms oscillating when you smack them together like that. You'll see that waveform. But if you take an impulse, if you will, or the recorded impulse, and play it backwards, it is a really startling sound, because it stops immediately.
Yeah.
Or in theory is supposed to. So you're not supposed to hear anything as that impulse comes. You know, if you invert the waveform of what you just recorded, it's going to start with the decay and then rise up to the stop ramp and then stop. But it never sounds right unless you're in an anechoic environment, because, and that's really part of the areas we have to work on, is the room and how it interacts with our playback.
Yeah. There's just kind of a thing about how often do we ever hear anything without any type of room now. I mean, I understand if we lived in the outdoors, but even then there was reverberations that give you spatial cues. It's all about spatial cues, and to have none of that, it's just such an unnatural kind of thing, I think.
It is, yeah. It absolutely is. I was reading something the other day, and someone said, if you want to see 3D from a two-dimensional object, cover one eye and stare at the object in a photo. And I have this audio magazine in front of me. I think it was an old Mark Levinson ad. There's this beautiful piece of equipment, and I stare down on it. It's got a black background on it. And I'm like, I can tell that's 2D, no problem, okay, with both eyes. You cover one eye and you stare at it, and all of a sudden, that amplifier starts to float on that background a little bit. And it's because you gave your brain less information to tell how many dimensions it was in. And so it's sort of like the analogy, if I draw a two-dimensional box and I draw a ball and I put it in the middle of it, the two-dimensional guy I drew on the piece of paper can't look over through that box and see that ball. Whereas a three-dimensional guy can look down at that piece of paper and see that guy and the ball and the box and put all the pieces together. So you just got to have the information, and the brain will do the rest.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been very, very interesting.
Thank you.
All right.